Upcoming support groups and workshops at Authentically Us. Tuesday, April 29th, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, Speed Friending. Monday, May the 5th at 8 p.m. Eastern, Messy Middle and Divorce Support Group. Thursday, May the 8th at 1 p.m. Eastern, Catalyst Relationship Recovery Support Group. Thursday, May the 15th, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Releasing Shame and Guilt Workshop. Thursday, May the 22nd, 7 p.m. Eastern, Lavender Dating's Writing Your Online Dating Profile. These online events and more available at Authentically Us, a support community for queer identifying women. For more information and to join, visit AnneMarieZanzel.com. Hey, queer friends and allies. Welcome to Season 6 of Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA plus stories. Here's your host, Anne-Marie Zanzel.
Hi, it's Anne-Marie. Welcome back.
Hi, Barb. Glad to be here.
It is so nice to have you back, Barb. As you know, this year on Coming Out and Beyond, we are having Barb come to a lot of our episodes because we are exploring questions that we often hear in Lotus Community Coaching and Authentically Us. This week, we're going to explore, is it queer enough? Because people worry about, are they LGBTQ enough all the time? And so we're going to break this down a little bit before we start. I want to check in with Barb and see how you're doing.
Well, I'm fine and dandy like sugar candy. What can I say? I've just had a long weekend. It was Victoria Day up here in Canada, so I got a lot of time in the sunshine, a lot of time with my plants, playing with the dogs. It was all good. How about you? You look tanned.
I know. I noticed that when I got on this morning. I don't know where I got tan from because was I outside at all? I worked all weekend. As you know, my wife and I are selling our Airbnb here in Nashville. So when I'm not doing this, I'm a construction worker.
Oh, well, that's where it comes from. You're outside.
Yeah, so that's where it's come from. It was the weekend before that I power washed the back deck, but I did power wash the garage. So maybe I was outside. I do look tan. I agree.
You look so tan. Well, compared to me and my ghostly pallor, so.
You're a white girl, honey.
I'm such a white girl.
So we're going to talk about queer identity today. A lot of times when people are just coming out, we have a lot of internalized doubts about our queer identity, especially if we're not visibly out yet, if we're not dating, or we are not embracing the traditional LGBTQIA plus symbols. So I'm curious, Barb, when you were in the beginning of this process, did you ever worry about, am I queer enough?
Other than, initially I did have a questioning phase, like so many other people do. And I think I've talked about this on other podcasts where, after my Catalyst experience, I went on 2 different dating sites and did like the Coke and Pepsi challenge and dated men and dated women. And it took me virtually no time at all to figure out that I was never going to date men again. But I think like a lot of folks in that early phase of coming out, I embraced a lot of like the pride get up, right? The rainbow stuff, and really leaned into femme representation. Did I not feel queer enough? I think I felt pretty queer, but being seen as a femme lesbian was a little more complex and continued to be for a really long time.
I think for me, I don't know if I ever had that question, am I queer enough? I think that became before. So for example, like a lot of our clients, I'm like, well, can I be a lesbian if I was married to a man? That was like one of my first questions. And what I realized that the only person that can name my sexual identity is me. So if I identify as a lesbian, even though I've been married as a man, I'm a lesbian. So I'll never forget my therapist at the time called me bisexual. And at first I was like, well, I guess I am. I was married to a man and now I want to date women and be with women. So I guess I am. And then 2 weeks later, she called me a bisexual again. And I said, no, I'm not. It Yes. Honestly, Barb, out of all my decisions I've had to make about my process, that one was the easiest one for me. I also had my partner. She was then I didn't even know her at that point. But eventually, 6 months later, I did get to know her. And my wife is, as you know, a proud and out lesbian. She embraces the word lesbian wholeheartedly because it means women who love women. That's all it means. And she also embraces dyke. So, I got very comfortable with those words really quickly. And it's so funny because I remember when I was first dating her, I called her a handy dyke, which is what she calls herself. She is a handy dyke. And a handy dyke is a woman that can do repairs and paint and wallpaper,
My
fix
girlfriend.
cars, you know. Both Barb and I, although we're more femme presenting, we are handy dykes.
I will say my girlfriend is much handier than I am.
Yeah, tons much handier than I am, but I am still very, very capable of doing a lot of stuff. Like I bought, for example, trim at Home Depot today.
Nice.
But when she called herself a handy dyke, I said that to one of my kids, and my kids were like, "Mom, you can't say that."
It's like,
It's
actually,
okay.
I can.
I can because I'm a dyke. So, first of all, we want to, Barb and I have already talked about this, but there is a real broad spectrum of queer identities. And self identification is really valid, regardless of how you express yourself or relationships. So, let's talk about that. A lot of times when people go to Pride or go to a queer event, the LGBTQIA plus community is quite a spectrum from people who present as very straight, but they're very proud queer people, to people who their outside expression matches their interior expression. So they're queer people that show up looking very queer. Like you had that phase you mentioned, where you showed up with your rainbows and stuff like that. And a lot of times people are very uncomfortable with it in our community. Would you agree?
I would definitely agree. I think
Yeah.
there's some folks who just jump in with, the pride t-shirt and the rainbow socks, and there's other folks, it takes them a lot longer to figure out what queerness looks like for them. And also suffer from a little bit of imposter syndrome. Maybe I don't belong, or just feeling like they want to be seen, but are afraid to be seen. Does that make sense?
Right. And I also think that that's saying I'm gay, but I'm not that kind of gay
Hmm.
really deals with the internalized homophobia that still exists in our community.
Hmm.
Meaning that when somebody is out and proud, but very out and proud and loud, or someone who presents as a drag queen, or someone who presents as trans,
Hmm.
sometimes a lot of people have internalized homophobia and internalized transphobia that they have not explored. And so remembering only I can name my sexuality, that also means that other people can name their sexual identity
That's right.
and their identity expression. So that's where I think as queer people, we get pushed to be accepting and non judgmental of all queer people when they show up. And that's hard to do.
Yeah, this brings to mind a lot of discussions that we've had too about gatekeepers and people who are act as arbiters of other people's queerness.
Mhm.
And in fact, as you say, no, the only person who can name my sexuality is me. But there's it's not quite as straightforward as that when we enter into community, is it?
Right.
Because there are people who have their own internalized biases and judgments about folks who are new to the community. Some don't, right? There's people
Mhm.
like your wife who are like, the more the merrier, come on in.
My wife, and I would say a lot of people are like that. The more the merrier. With a caveat, a lot of times, especially with women, women will be more the merrier, but they don't want to date you, especially if you're just coming out, or still married to your husband.
Hmm.
Because, I mean, like, if you think about it from your own perspective, no one wants to be in a relationship with somebody who's in another relationship. I mean, if you're somebody who practices monogamy.
Hmm.
So a lot of times, when you are new to the community and you're looking for other women, a lot of times you will find women that are in the same situation as you, meaning they're still married to their husbands and looking to explore this. So we're getting a little off topic here. Let me get back on our road we're traveling today. So we want to talk about visibility versus authenticity. We want to explore how societal expectations often equate visibility with authenticity. And we sort of want to challenge that notion by affirming that private or less visible expressions of queerness are equally valid.
Completely. Yes. You don't have to run down the street
Waving a pride
waving
flag.
the pride flag. Maybe during Pride. Sure. And there might be times where you do want to do that, and that's totally fine. Any sort of outward expression that you have, how you present yourself to the world, doesn't define what you are on the inside.
Hmm.
There's plenty of closeted people who are very straight presenting and they're not, right?
Hmm.
Like it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you wear a suit and tie, it doesn't matter what. Like if you're queer, you're queer, and that's something that comes from within.
Yes. And I also think, too, that we also want to mention for some of our listeners, it is just not safe to come out.
Mm.
They live in countries that there's persecution of queer people. We do have a lot of people from India who listen to this podcast, and we do have some people from Africa who listen to this podcast. And in some areas, it is hard to be gay. It is very, very hard, and any physical representation of that on the outside can cause discrimination. In some African countries, it can even cause jail time. So people have to be really careful about that. And we just want you to know, even if you can't come out, we see you and we acknowledge you, because we know that not everybody has the freedom that Barb and I have had to be able to plant our flag in LGBTQville and say, hey, I'm here and I'm queer.
That really, thank you for acknowledging our privilege, right? Like we do have an enormous amount of privilege to be able to live openly as we are. And this is why I think the current state of affairs in the United States is so flummoxing for so many folks because it's like a step backwards, right?
Mhm.
And we're talking about places other than North America, but let's also acknowledge for our listeners in the United States that there are parts of the United States where it isn't especially safe to be in a
There is
minority.
parts of Canada that's not especially safe. If I was in Alberta, there's much more conservative areas of Canada. I mean, you live in Ontario, which is a pretty liberal province, but Canada has different provinces that are more conservative and more Christian, which is hard to come out.
Yeah, Alberta is definitely our most conservative
Yes.
region of Canada, and I think like a lot of places, the more rural you go, the more conservative it becomes. There's definitely lots of conservatives in rural Ontario as well.
Hmm.
So just acknowledging, like, no matter where you are, that if you're observing your world and recognizing like, hey, it doesn't feel safe to come out, that's probably quite valid. And yeah, do make the decisions that keep you the safest for sure.
So we want to talk a little bit about internalized homophobia here. Because internalized homophobia also can manifest as self doubt, especially when your experience doesn't align with mainstream queer narratives. So,
Mhm.
the mainstream queer narrative is everybody figures this out when they're between 12 and 20, and they have a typical city like queer experience, and so many of us have such different expressions of the queer experience.
Mm-hmm.
Because before, when I came out and you came out in 2016 and 17, there was no visible representation of the later in life experience. No,
Mm-hmm.
no.
Mm-hmm.
And
No.
like when I Googled late in life lesbian, I found that one blog, which took me to that Facebook group, which is now defunct. I found that one blog and that was there.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say another thing too is like when I was having my web designer like do research, she researched to see if anybody was talking about coming out later in life, and nobody was doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody.
Mm-hmm.
So we built the website based on the fact is we wanted to talk about this experience and make it visible to other women who are going through it. So now there's other people who are doing that as well. And there's also men who are doing it for the male experience. But we wanted to show that visible representation that, you know what, a lot of people don't figure this out at 18. And it's okay that you're not figuring it out until your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s.
If there is one thing that I can accomplish in this work that we do, it is to normalize the experience of coming out later in life and having a shift in either your sexuality or your gender. It is far more common than people realize. And I think it's waiting for its moment. Like I can feel the burgeoning in the broader conversation that the conversation's starting to build a little bit about this particular issue in the same way that maybe 15 or 20 years ago, the broader discussion about transness was starting to burgeon. And then if you remember, like Caitlyn Jenner ended up on the cover of Time magazine, and then everybody seemed to be aware of what it means to be transgender.
Correct.
And I think that for later in lifers, that moment of awareness is coming.
And we know this because one of our clients, Erica, is going to be on a documentary that is going to be released, I think, on June 6th, called Late to the Party, and it's going to be on ABC. And so we know this is coming. And I know this is going to be a topic of conversation when
It'll be interesting to see what happens after June 6th, right?
this comes from Charles Blow, who is a New York Times journalist who came out later in life. And he had been married years to a woman, and then he came out later. And he was the impetus behind getting this documentary made. And the reason we're so familiar with it is because they contacted us early
Right.
in this process, and we put it out to our people to see if anybody was interested. Like Barb and I were too far along on the journey to be in this documentary, but our people weren't. And so one of our clients very bravely went and told her story on this documentary. So we're really excited to watch this documentary and see what they made of it. I'm
And
really,
I
really
hope
excited.
people will watch. And if they feel like they are like where we were at back before we were fully out, that they will recognize themselves in that story and made to feel like, I'm not a freak for having this happen. I know that's how I felt. I felt like I was the only woman in the world. It's like, that Little Britain joke about the only gay in the village.
Mhm.
I was the only woman in the world to have this like sudden change. And in fact, I am most definitely not the only woman in the world. I am in the company of thousands and thousands of other people who have this awareness. Yeah,
I will say
it's
hundreds and hundreds of thousands. Yes.
so common. We're just not talking about it enough. Well, I mean, you and I are, but on a broader scale, it's not being talked about it enough. And I think probably too, as more like systems that take care of people, like things like counselors and therapists or the medical community, like start to become more educated about it, then that's when the information will start to disseminate. So we need to keep pushing for greater awareness and to have like broader systems support our people in these transitions.
So another thing that is brought up that our clients talk about because they are always worried about coming out to family and friends.
Mm-hmm.
They say, "Do I need to come out if I don't have a partner?" And or they say, I think I'm going to wait until I'm dating somebody before I tell my family that I am gay. And Barb and I are like, I don't know if that's such a good idea. And why do we say that?
Nobody deserves our story, right? We come out on our own terms to, usually when we come out, we do it in a way that's safest first. We come out to people who are most trusted. Sometimes it's to another person within the queer community so that we know for sure we'll be accepted. Not everybody deserves our story, but we also, like, at some point, if you want to, or when we are happiest in life is when we are living our lives closely aligned to our values. This is the way that we live, the actions and behaviors and decisions that we make are aligned with our values. And when those two things are farther apart, that space in between is where unhappiness lives. Right? So the goal, I think, for the happiest and healthiest life is to be able to live outwardly who we are, confidently and outwardly as who we are. Because there's no stress of keeping these two things apart. And we can decide, yeah, you know what? I'm going to wait for whatever reason, whatever day, magical day happens before I come out. I'm going to wait till the sky is blue for 14 consecutive days. I'm going to wait till fish fly. I'm going to wait for, we can always keep pushing it down the line and keep making excuses for it. But ultimately, and it's okay. If you're not ready, you're not ready. But if you want to live your happiest and best life, doing it in a way that is outward and confident and authentic to who you are is the best formula for that. And we see that, right? With the women we work with all the time.
Yes. And I want to add another caveat to that is when we don't come out until a person comes into the picture to our family and friends, that puts the burden on our new partner. Because a lot of times families, especially families that are very uneducated about the queer community or even resistant or cruel, they will think that that person turned you.
Totally. Do you remember my youngest daughter was like, thought my catalyst was a witch who put a spell on me. She was 13. But you're right. Like this person turns you gay. Well, actually, that's not how that works.
That is not how it works. Nobody turns you gay. They can confirm your gayness. Like the reason why we are dating people of the same gender for us is because we're curious to know if like everything we think about ourselves is true, and having your first sexual encounters can confirm the sexual piece of the coming out journey because
Right.
we are a whole person. So there's
Yeah.
a spiritual piece, an intellectual piece, an emotional piece, and the physical piece. So having that first queer relationship where you are exploring sex with the correct gender for your sexual orientation, when that happens, that's a small piece of the physical experience of coming
Mm-hmm.
out later in life. So many times, straight people and newly out people reduce this to just sex, and it's so much more than sex.
It really is.
And
Really
so
is.
when you don't bring that person home until, you've explored all that, and then, a lot of times there will be a lot of resistance against the person.
Sure.
So when you have already told your family, whether they ever mention it again to you or not, you have had that conversation with them. So when you do show up with a significant other, there's not going to be resistance against a significant other. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there may be resistance because they're gay, but they're not going to say, oh, that person turned you. Oh, you're only gay for her or him. You will not have any of that conversation, hopefully.
I'm in complete agreement with you there. And I think if you do come out to family and or friends and you're not with somebody and you meet or met with resistance, well, how do you know? Right? How do you
Mhm.
know if you haven't been with a woman in that way?
Mhm.
Well, what do we say to that? How did you know? It's like we don't ask young heterosexual people to go out and confirm their sexuality by going and sleeping with people. We just trust that they know, right?
Right. And that is one of those things that I have always used with people is like we don't ask, when you're straight, they didn't say, well, you need to sleep with that boy to make sure you're straight.
Right? Nobody has that.
It's just some layer that they've put on it. And unfortunately, too, people in the queer community put it on there too,
Mhm.
which again, that is a gatekeeper, or that is how that person has experienced their queerness. So
Mhm.
they are allowed to experience their queerness that way, and you can experience it your own way. And I just want to say about a word about queer. A lot of times, people who have come out really early often have a lot of resistance against the word queer because it was used as a slur. It was used to make people feel othered. Um, and even though Barb and I are at the age where we could feel about the word queer, about that the same way, we are actually of the class of 2016 and 2017. So, what I have found is that our view of LGBTQ community, of queerness, of transness is often deeply affected by when we came out. So even though Barb and I, I was 52, Barb was 40 something when she came out, our experience of coming out is tied to the time of when we came out. So Barb and I tend to be much more comfortable
Totally.
with the word queer, with the word lesbian, because there was a reclamation of the word lesbian when I came out. More comfortable with transness. I don't know if I said that. We're just really comfortable with all those things. And so the reason why we're using is, am I queer enough? Or instead of as, am I lesbian enough? Or am I gay enough? We're
Mhm.
using the word queer today because that is the experience of the generation of people that we are working with now, because they're coming out in a time in which queer equates LGBTQIA plus somewhere. So that's why we use this word.
I love that. I hope that we can keep this part of the conversation going beyond this podcast, especially with the two different sort of factions of people who've been long out and people who are newly out. I can really respect and understand why the word queer is
Me too.
cringeworthy for some folks. And I also hope that long out folks are coming to understand why the word queer is so well embraced by folks who are further along in life but newly out. A lot of first of all, figuring out which label applies to us is a journey. It's not like we just one day go, I'm a lesbian. I mean, maybe some people do, but usually it starts with a journey. Like maybe I'm bi, maybe I'm queer, maybe I'm a lesbian. There's an evolution as you get farther along the path of self-discovery.
And also, too, it is very normal and very typical to try on every letter of the
Yes.
LGBTQIA plus community, or at least give it thought
Yes.
or finding one that settles on you settle with, or that feels true to you. For example, I have thought a lot about gender. I have thought an awful lot about gender, and I have decided that it is not a good fit for me. But I have thought a lot about non-binary.
Mhm.
I haven't thought about, transitioning, but I have definitely thought about, gender fluid, non binary, all those things like that. I've come to the conclusion it just doesn't fit me. So
Mhm.
it is normal to think about all those things. And we just want people to know that it is okay to explore every letter of the alphabet before you settle on one that fits you, or you decide, I hate labels, I'm not doing this.
Mhm.
And that is fine too. It might trip you up in dating apps and stuff like that because they ask you to label yourself there.
Right. Yes.
We can give you Barb can give you a workaround about that. So we really want to encourage people to, as they're thinking about this, is some ways to confirm, to affirm your queer identity. And we're gonna beat our drum, join a community.
Oh my gosh.
Join a community.
Yes.
We have so many options for you. We have Authentically Us, which is it is our community on Mighty Networks. It is a place where you can be queer. And the cost is very minimal. It is $35 a month, and you get your first month free. And if you need more support, we suggest you look into Lotus Community Coaching, because you not only get a more smaller community, you also get individual coaching from Barb or I, wherever you are on this journey. And so you can do that. And guess what? We're having Women Weekend again.
Yeah.
Which is in Provincetown in Women's Week. It's the 15th to 18th of October, 2025. And we would love to invite you to that. So exploring your identity in any of these three communities cultivated by women who have been there and whose number one priority is keeping you safe and seen at the same time is an absolutely wonderful way you can nourish your queer identity as you are going through this process, especially if you're not fully out yet. It's great to be there if you're fully out, but if you're still like working through all those things, it's nice to show up as a lesbian, as a woman loving woman, as someone who is questioning your gender in a community where people are all doing the same thing. It is so great to be there.
Oh, I can't say enough about it. And I think that there is an opportunity for clarity that is afforded in a group scenario that just isn't possible to have on your own in an individual experience. When we get into groups, first of all, we'll be naturally attracted to the groups of people we are feeling most aligned with, right? But when we see versions of ourselves reflected in other people, it affords us some clarity. And all of a sudden, the answers start to flow,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes.
whether it's an online group, an in person group, or all of the above, we really cannot beat this drum loud enough. Must lean into community for the kind of growth that is required for this process.
And you know what I think we'll do is that we'll link our coming out guide to this podcast episode, because then you can go and see some other ways we can suggest how to build community. But if you want to hang out with Barb and I, join one of our communities. They are an amazing place. I also suggest creating some personal affirmations for yourself, like things you can say when that, first of all, I would suggest this: the voice in your head that says you're not gay enough or queer enough or lesbian enough. Let's name her, him, or them. Name them, because you know when they show up. So name them, give them a funny name. People give all kinds of names to that little voice in your head. So when he, she, or they show up, give them a name
Mm-hmm.
and say, okay, I'm going to give mine a name. Let me think. I'll give what can I name mine? I'm going to give the voice in my head. I'm going to call her Alice. So that's my mom's name. She was such a smart woman, but man, she was tough on me. So I'm going to tell Alice to be quiet. Alice said, that's not very helpful right now.
Right.
And so having that beautiful affirmation, like, I'm a beautiful queer woman.
Mm-hmm.
I am a lesbian. I am a gay man. I am a trans person. I am perfectly complete the way I am. Any of those I am statements, even though you may still have one foot in straight world and one foot sets in queer world, using an I am statement helps our brains, because our brains need to think that things actually have happened. Using those affirmations, like, I'm a big beautiful lesbian, or I am a delicious dyke, anything you can choose, is actually, you can actually have fun with those affirmations.
You totally can. And it's okay to just think them. They're just as effective if you think them as if you speak them. It's the intentionality of it that's really important. And it's so interesting when you talk about like naming your inner critic or naming that voice of doubt. What is actually happening when you do that? There's a term for it in psychology called cognitive diffusion. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like separating your negative thought or feeling from your sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
So it works the same too if you say, I notice that I'm having the feeling that, right? It's creating distance between the space between you are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings. There's like you at the center, and then there's these other things that happen that you experience. So if you experience that negative thought and you call her Alice, say, hey, Alice, can it? Nobody asked for your opinion. Like, it's a lot easier to be dismissive of that thought. It's also a lot easier when we become separated from from our difficult thoughts to really like pick them up, look at them, examine them, and then ask ourselves, is this true? Is this true?
Is
Or
this
is
true?
it not true? And this is part of the individual work that we do with folks as well, right? Like going into this a little bit deeper and examining your thoughts and helping you to separate yourself from those difficult feelings, and not to ignore them, not to push them away, because when we push away things that are hard, they become harder, but to just really be critical of them and to look at them and say, is this true? Is this not true?
I agree with everything you said. And I also want to say that this is an individual journey. Barb and I are giving you perspectives. We are giving you some advice based on what we've seen, but we want everyone to be able to say, hey, this is my journey, and we all have a unique path doing it. Although Barb and I have very similar stories, similar threads, they're not the exact same story. If you want, you can go back and listen to the podcast where we've talked about our individual stories. And they're different. There's a couple of similar threads in there, but they're different stories. So there is no singular way to be queer. Mm-hmm. And what we really want to say is that each journey is valid and worthy of queerness.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So for this episode today, Barb, what are some of our key points that we want people to take away?
So key things are nobody can name our sexuality except for ourselves. However late you came to the party, you are a valid member of this community. You don't have to be gayer or to dress gay, or it just doesn't matter how you present. What shows on the inside doesn't necessarily reflect on the outside. To be safe as you're coming out, right? And to look at, internalized homophobia and really examine those inner thoughts and where they come from, and ask yourself whether this is true or not. And I think the final thing would be to align your values and your authenticity with your actions for greater happiness.
I would say also to please seek out community. Mm-hmm. I think that will make all the difference in the world for you. And we have experienced seeing our clients go from a turtle's pace to something a little bit more rapid when they are in community with other people. It changes things. So we would love to invite you to reflect on your own experiences and share your stories or questions via one of our community platforms or on social media, because we love to hear people's stories. It's what makes us tick. And so hearing your story is so helpful for us, especially when we guide other people. And please reach out to us. You can reach out Barb in a lot of social media places. You can find me all over social media, but the easiest way to contact us is at support@AnneMarieZanzel.com. You get both of us then, and we both access that email account. And so if you have any questions or concerns or some feedback from this episode, we would love to hear from you. So thanks, Barb. It was good talking with you today.
It's always a blast. Thanks, Anne-Marie.
You've been listening to Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA+ stories with Anne-Marie Zanzel. New episodes of the Coming Out and Beyond podcast drop every other Friday. You can tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at AnneMarieZanzel.com. Be sure to hit subscribe when tuning in so you never miss an episode. And for more resources, articles, videos, and a free downloadable guide for coming out later in life, visit AnneMarieZanzel.com.